I'm pleased to be here tonight and introducing this very incredible artist, Yayoi Kusama, in a very different kind of environment. Usually it's at museums or in art historical environments, but now it's with scientists. And I think that, Kusama has been a real pioneer throughout her career. So I just wanted to present an overview of the exhibition, as well as her, the genesis of this idea of infinity, and just kind of open up some questions that relate to the contemporary concerns with notions of this kind of immersive experience within the ideas of virtual and analog. So Kusama has produced more than 20 distinct mirror rooms since 1965. And what you see here is Kusama's Falaise field. And this was considered one of the very first infinity mirror rooms ever to be produced. This was in New York, and this comprises of quite a small room, actually, 15 by 15 feet, with these very phallic soft sculptures that she's flying over. And this is the very most recent mirror room called All the Eternal Love I Have for the Pumpkins. And both of these we had included in the exhibition, but it features her very signature pumpkins, which derives from her childhood. She grew up in a plantation where there were lots of different vegetable gardens, and some of the earliest memories she had was when her grandfather took her through the pumpkin fields. And she immediately took to the pumpkins as a very kind of grotesque, but also there's a saying in Japanese, pumpkin head, which means a kind of it's a very derogatory kind of stupid pumpkin head. And so she wanted to kind of include these as part of her lifelong motif. She has also evolved these kind of more grotesque immersive spaces into more peep-like structures. What you see here is actually a very, very small-scale, intimate peep where you can see a compression of infinity, where there are stainless steel balls that are just lit within a mirrored box. And this is actually part of a larger installation that I'll show you in a bit. And this is perhaps one of the most recognizable mirror rooms, called Souls of Millions of Light Years Away. Adele, the singer, actually recorded a music video inside, and this is the expansiveness of this kind of idea of infinity within a very cosmological environment, just with 150 LED lights. So the exhibition really is the first to cover this 65-year span of the artist's career, and we were the first to gather 6 of her mirror rooms from 1965 to the present. And that quote that opens the show, our Earth is only one polka dot amongst a million stars in the universe, is something that is kind of a motto for the idea of relativity that she has always carried with her. These are just some exhibition shots of the space that include her sculptures and her newest paintings. And you can see that this show is very much a social media phenomenon. And in terms of curating this exhibition, the genesis really of the infinity, this idea of infinity, is from the motif of the polka dot, which is carried within the artist's memory when she was a young child. And she was born in Nagano, and she grew up during the pre-war 1929, and so when the Japanese government was kind of riding towards this very totalitarian state, and she experienced a lot of violence, and she actually was sewing military uniforms in parachute factories. And so she has this very kind of tactile experience. But she started to have hallucinations of polka dots appearing not only within her body, but also in surrounding her environment. And she, in order to confront these fears, she started to draw and paint these polka dots. And this is one of the earliest examples from 1952 of a water droplet. And the negative spaces of the polka dot actually began to expand into what she would eventually call infinity nets. And that's what you see in the middle of this picture, number IQ, and the kind of subterranean landscapes that she started to create after her years. So she was in the United States. She moved from 1957 to 1973. So she was actually experienced the 60s in New York, and came back to Japan in the 70s. And so she went through a very, very intense period through the anti-Vietnam War protests. Her philosophy of infinity actually also includes this idea of obliteration. So you have this banner in front of, in New York here, it's called Anatomic Explosions, that says self-obliteration. And this is an idea that she had in protest against the US's invasion into Southeast Asia. And it was this idea of stripping yourself naked and losing your egos and seeing each other as equals. And so she started to promote these kind of guerrilla-like performances outside to paint polka dots on each other. And so you might have seen some of these psychedelic kind of performances also in films that were made during this time. And performances here, the 14th Street Happening, she's actually performing on top of one of the panels from Falaise Field, the first Infinity Mirror Room. And this is a photograph that was shot with a prismatic lens. So you have the doubling of her images. She also began to use mirrors in terms of spheres, and this is called Narcissus Garden, that she presented at the Venice Biennale in 1966. And here it's kind of like a sea of reflections. But the context of this is actually in protest against the rise of pop art in the 60s, and she was actually not officially invited. So she was selling each of these mirrored balls for, I think, 2 liras, and got arrested. And so it was this, she wanted to just say that, artwork could be like selling popcorn. The value is really, it's dependent on, not, on more of a inherent value rather than just this kind of market environment. But I think it was as a Japanese woman, and she was very much not recognized during that time, and so it was very difficult to get the kind of attention that she now has. At this moment in time, she is probably the most well-known artist, female artist, in the world. We also had some recent sculptures and paintings that I'm just going to skip over here because there's a lot more to cover. Some of the sculptures that she began, so I was talking about her idea of proliferation and the idea of the polka dots kind of expanding. So this was the similar idea with these soft sculptures. She would create these all-over environments over everyday materials like sofas and couches and even sinks and ladders, and create these very grotesque, eerie kind of environments that were sort of like a nightmarish environment. And when she begins to accumulate this kind of motif into a more kind of tightened sphere, tightened environment here, this is the first time that she actually started to use the repetitive device of the photograph. So this is called Violet Obsession. It's from MoMA in New York, but the first time that she presented this was in 1963, before Andy Warhol, in fact, started to create his serial wallpapered cow environments. And so he actually got the idea from Kusama when she presented this at Gertrude Stein Gallery. And the thesis really for the Hirshhorn exhibition, in my mind, is so you have this proliferation of the physical labor of creating a one image of the dot or this kind of phallic soft sculpture into thousands of pieces, but her body was not fast enough to be able to create this kind of these all-over environments. And so what she began to do was use the photograph as a reproductive device to create thousands of images around, and this was in fact called 1000 Boats Show. And so she uses photography in order to reproduce this kind of environment, and then the mirror as a device to then activate her the vision of repetition. In 1966, she creates a work called Love Forever, and this is a hexagonal chamber that has kinetic, flashing, incandescent lights that are inside. This is this is lined with mirrors on the outside and also on the inside. And this is a diagram for an exhibition in Holland called Zero on Sea. It was this kind of Gesamtkunstwerk of artists who came together to try and move beyond painting and sculpture and this kind of two-dimensional, three-dimensional idea of art and move into more immaterial environments like air or fire or, in this case, mirrors as a device to really activate this idea of reflection and also kinetic energy. And so this is her instruction. To the electrician, can you get me an electrician to install these? And since it was in Holland, she wanted to also she would distribute these little buttons that says Love Forever. And so this was included in our exhibition. Here you have the exterior of Falaise Field, so you can really get the scale. And then when you walk around the kind of cubed structure, you open and you enter the space. And then you, here this is me, but you shut the door, and what you have is just this infinite environment. So you really, the transformation of your sense of immersion really happens within an instant. This is Love Forever, and the big mural that you see on the left is in fact Kusama lying inside of this structure. And this was from 1966, but the work that we had on view is from 94. And this is what you see inside. And it's with flashing lights, so just imagine it's kinetic. We also had more environmental or architectural installations with a mirrored dome. And you enter this mirrored dome and you have more suspended balloons. So you have this very kind of carnivalesque environment. And then there was also a smaller peep that it showed at the very beginning. So you have this kind of expansion and compression of scale. And then from the more kind of tactile reflections of objects like suspended vinyl balloons and sculptures, Kusama begins to use the diode, the LED lights in 2008. It's actually a kind of a long process. I think she began to really try to create these environments in 2000 with the work called Fireflies on the Water. So these spaces, some of them actually have water on the bottom, and what you sense is this kind of weightlessness, this weightless cosmos that you see, not just reflections around the top and the on your sides, but also way down in the ground. And so there is this kind of real weightless aspect. And these also are on a timed sequence. And so the lights actually flutter in this very staccato-esque way, and it's this kind of beautiful environment. And she also has used these Japanese paper lanterns. This is called Aftermath of Obliteration of Eternity. Very dark, long title, and this is just another angle. And that installation actually is very resonant of the Toro Nagashi, which is the idea of the lanterns that are commemorated every summer at the end of August after the Obon festivals, and it has particular meaning in Hiroshima when it's this annual festival to commemorate the victims of the atomic bomb. And so there is this idea of this kind of spirit energy as well that you begin to sense. And this is, again, the pumpkin near room. And the finale of the exhibition included a very participatory work called Obliteration Room. And in 1967, Kusama actually began to use mannequins to put polka dots as well as kind of do these spray paints around the environment. And in order to replicate this idea of, that more political idea of radical connectivity through self-obliteration, today this is a much more accessible, and this was more of an educational initiative to create a more domestic space that is painted completely white, and viewers are given stickers of, I think, 6 colored polka dots. And by the end of the exhibition, the room was completely covered. And so it's this idea of you partaking in her vision of infinity and transformation of a space. And the exhibition is actually touring through Seattle, actually next week. It opens there, and then Los Angeles, Cleveland, Toronto, and Atlanta. And at Cleveland, we're going to have a work here called Where the Lights Go. And this is actually a very special one because it uses no electricity. It just has holes, and inside is completely dark, but it's all lined with mirrors. So you enter, and all you see is the sunlight reflecting through. And so the infinite space is actually caused by the natural light. And I just wanted to end here with a Japanese design group called Team Lab. And all of Kusama's work is analog. Nothing is digitized. And there are artists, contemporary younger artists, who have been very influenced or inspired by Kusama's notion of infinity through her immersive spaces. But they use digital projections. And Team Lab actually it's an interactive space. So this is, you enter the environment and you have a cell phone that is programmed to activate the space. And so whatever kind of program that you enter, you can actually control the way in which immersion can happen. But this is all digital projections rather than the actual reflections. So there is a difference between the kind of analog and virtual space that you see here. And I wanted to also touch on this idea of what I sense as more of this moment here. I guess I should probably read this out loud because it was something that I had written as a postscript for my essay in the catalog, but it never made it in because I wanted to keep it a little bit more contained. But This is it. So how do we experience Kusama's infinity mirror rooms at a moment when the very definition of anthropomorphism is being redefined in our post-internet moment, in which distinctions between the virtual and actual experience are increasingly becoming normalized? In the wake of recent philosophical tendencies surrounding new materialisms and speculative realism, in which objects take on a certain agency and equal pairing with artistic and viewing subjects, a new set of terms is beginning to surface between our tactile relation to objects and the immateriality of virtual space. This is a moment in which the uncanny valley effect, the simultaneous experience of repulsion and attraction sensed from computer-generated images exhibiting human likeness, is becoming transposed onto immaterial environments through new virtual reality devices. Rather than as models of spectacle, the mirror rooms allow us to reassess Kusama's entire artistic practice by offering a critical understanding of the corporeal limits of perception and the sensory optics, tactility, and intuition of matter. So I will then there. Thank you.